You know, that Polo player logo? The one that's been on everything from your dad's golf shirt to a $5,000 suit? Well, the guy who created it started by selling ties out of a drawer in someone else's showroom. And what he built changed American fashion forever. This is how a kid from the Bronx sold the world a dream that never actually existed. His name wasn't even Ralph Lauren, it was Ralph Lifshitz, born October 14th, 1939 in the Bronx, New York. And if you think that sounds like the setup for every classic American success story, you're absolutely right. But here's what makes Ralph's story different. His parents were Jewish immigrants from Belarus. His father, Frank, was a house painter. They were poor, but they definitely weren't wealthy. They lived in a small apartment, and young Ralph shared a bedroom with his two brothers. But here's where it gets interesting. While most kids in the Bronx were obsessing over baseball cards and comic books, Ralph was obsessing over something else entirely: style. He'd watch movies and study how Cary Grant tied his tie, how Fred Astaire wore his suits. He wasn't just watching the movies, he was analyzing the costume design. At 16, he legally changed his last name to Lauren. And people always ask why. He'd later say it wasn't about running from his heritage, it was about creating something new, a fresh identity. And that idea of creating an identity would become the foundation of everything he built. Ralph went to Baruch College, but dropped out after 2 years. He did a stint in the Army. And then, in 1964, he got a job that would change everything: selling ties at a company called A. Rivets. He was good at it, really good. But he kept noticing something. All the ties were narrow. That was the style back then. Skinny ties, very British, very mod. And Ralph thought, this is boring. So in 1967, at 28 years old, Ralph went to his boss with an idea. Let me design my own line of ties. His boss said no. Too risky, too different. So Ralph did what any future billionaire would do. He borrowed $50,000. $50,000 in 1967, which is like borrowing almost $500,000 today. He didn't come from money. This was everything. And he made ties. But not just any ties, wide ties. 4 inches wide when everyone else was doing 2. He made them in bold colors, luxurious fabrics, silk and wool. And here's the genius part. While other designers were naming their brands after themselves in fancy European-sounding ways, Ralph called his brand Polo, the sport of aristocrats, of British royalty, of old money and country estates, and a world that Ralph Lifshitz from the Bronx had never been part of. He was selling aspiration, not just ties, a lifestyle. And he convinced Bloomingdale's to carry them. The ties were expensive, $15 when most ties cost $5, but they flew off the shelves. Within a year, he was doing $500,000 in sales. By 1968, Ralph launched a full menswear line. And in 1971, here it comes, the women's line. He opened his first store on Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills, designed to look like someone's mansion, not a retail space. You weren't just shopping, you were being invited into a world. Now here's where Ralph Lauren did something revolutionary that we completely take for granted today. Before Ralph, fashion designers made clothes. That's it. You had your runway shows, your fancy collections, maybe some perfume on the side. But Ralph sold you an entire life. He didn't just make a dress. He made the dress, the bag, the shoes, the jewelry, the perfume, the home furniture, the sheets you sleep on, the paint on your walls. He created what we now call lifestyle branding, and he was one of the first to do it. In 1972, he released the Polo shirt. Yeah, that Polo shirt. The mesh cotton one with the little Polo player on it. It came in 24 colors, and it became a uniform. For prep school kids, for country club members, for hip-hop artists, for literally everyone. The logo, that little guy on a horse, became one of the most recognizable symbols in the world. And here's something wild. Ralph never played polo, not once. But he understood something crucial. People don't buy what you make. They buy what it makes them feel. In 1974, he designed all the costumes for The Great Gatsby movie with Robert Redford, and that cemented it. Ralph Lauren wasn't just making clothes. He was creating American mythology. The Ivy League dream, the Western cowboy, the Jazz Age elegance. He opened the Rhinelander Mansion store in New York in 1986, a full renovation of a Madison Avenue mansion that cost $14 million. People didn't go there to shop. They went there to experience wealth, even if they were just buying a $200 sweater. The 80s and 90s were massive. Purple Label in 1995, his ultra-luxury line with suits starting at $3,000. He went public in 1997, one of the few fashion companies to do so successfully. But here's where the Ralph Lauren story gets really fascinating. The cultural penetration. In the 80s and 90s, hip-hop culture adopted polo in a way Ralph never planned. Rappers from Queens and Brooklyn, guys who grew up like Ralph did, in working-class neighborhoods, they wore polo as a symbol of making it. The Lowlifes, a crew from Brooklyn, literally built their identity around stealing and collecting rare polo pieces. Ralph didn't design for them, but they took his brand and made it theirs. And instead of fighting it, the brand quietly embraced it. That's the genius. Polo became whatever you needed it to be. Prep school privilege and street credibility. Then there's the sports moments. Ralph Lauren has dressed the U.S. Olympic team since 2008. Every opening ceremony, every closing ceremony. American athletes walking out in Ralph Lauren. That's not just fashion. That's nationalism as branding. Wimbledon, the US Open. He didn't just sponsor, he defined the look. Tennis whites, cable knit sweaters, the whole aesthetic we associate with those sports, Ralph built that. And movies. So many movies. Annie Hall, The Great Gatsby, American Gigolo, even Friends. Rachel Green worked at Ralph Lauren, and that wasn't random. It signaled aspiration, New York sophistication. By the 2000s, Ralph Lauren wasn't just a brand. It was shorthand for American style itself. So what's the secret? How does a kid from the Bronx with no fashion training build a $7 billion company? Ralph himself has said it over and over. I don't design clothes. I design dreams. And he means it. He never went to fashion school. He couldn't sketch like other designers. He wasn't a tailor. What he understood was storytelling. He understood that people want to buy into a narrative about themselves. You're not buying a polo shirt. You're buying the idea that you're the kind of person who summers in the Hamptons, even if you've never been. You're buying the fantasy of old money, of effortless elegance, of belonging to a club you were never actually invited to. And the beautiful irony? Ralph created this entire mythology of waspy, East Coast, old money privilege. And he was none of those things. He was a Jewish kid from the Bronx who built the dream because he was on the outside looking in. Today, Ralph Lauren is 85 years old. He's worth over $7 billion. He still serves as Chief Creative Officer. He never fully stepped away because the brand is him. He's won every award. The CFDA Lifetime Achievement Award. He's been knighted. He's built a cancer research center. He's preserved historic buildings. His car collection alone is worth hundreds of millions. Every single car reflecting that same aesthetic. Timeless, elegant, classic Americana. But here's maybe the most interesting part of his legacy. He proved that American fashion didn't have to apologize for not being European. For decades, if you wanted real fashion, you looked to Paris, to Milan, to London. But Ralph took American iconography, cowboys, Ivy League, the Old West, Jazz Age New York, and he made it luxurious. He made it aspirational. From a drawer full of ties to a global empire. From Ralph Lifshitz to Ralph Lauren. From the Bronx to dressing Olympic athletes and presidents. It's one of those rare stories that actually lives up to the hype. Because Ralph didn't just build a clothing company, he built a mirror. One that shows us not who we are, but who we want to be. And maybe that's the most American thing of all. If you stuck around this long, you're probably the kind of person who loves these deep dives into the stories behind the brands we see every day. There's a lot more where this came from. The empires, the failures, the wild origin stories nobody talks about. Anyway, thanks for watching.